As much as we love our traditional foods, our Newfoundland foods, foods that we grew up with, today we're going to be cooking something different. We're going to be doing a stir fry with some egg noodles. Mom and Dad tried this recipe. Actually, they created the recipe a few weeks ago. So we decided to do it again and add even more ingredients. It is fantastic. The different sauces, even some wine. The wine that we use to baste our meats, we added that too. It is fantastic. Now this is more like a champagne type wine. It's a bubbly. Most wines, it's going to give you a real bad taste when you're cooking it. So you got to know what you're doing. We tried a lot of different wines in the beginning until we finally hit this one. It's a very cheap wine. You might get it for $12 or $14, and it gives a amazing taste on the foods. You already know I love food. My family loves food. I think a lot of us really love food. But growing up, we were only influenced by our own culture, our grandparents, our older relatives, the foods that they had. And that's mostly all we had. We didn't experiment much with varieties of foods. There wasn't much of variety. We didn't have broccoli. I don't even know if we had green beans. And our local grocery store was very limited to any type of variety. And even when we traveled to the bigger centers, the bigger grocery stores, there wasn't a lot to experience. Mostly just our traditional foods. And whatever sells the most is what they're going to supply. But we have had such an influx of other cultures coming into our province and into our country where it's shifted. And we get to experience these wonderful and delicious foods. And one of the greatest things is to create your own. Mix and match, just throw things in the pot. And that's the best thing about this meal. They tried this a few weeks ago, just throwing everything together, and it was fantastic. So as we was eating it, it was like, okay, if you added some broccoli, if you added some those little mini corn on the cobs, we can even make this dish even more hearty. I'm telling you, it is fantastic. So when it comes to foods, I'm part of a generation that are used to the old traditional foods, and even generations before me. Growing up, we didn't have a lot of influence from other countries, other cultures, and we didn't have that variety of foods. I don't even know if broccoli was a thing back then. Today, it's totally different. So this is another reason why a lot of today's generation doesn't eat our traditional foods. They didn't grow up with it. There's so much changing. Pastas is almost a weekly or every second day is having pasta. That's something we rarely had growing up. We mostly had goulash, which was fantastic. And I like the basic goulash because it brings back those memories. Biscotti as well. And I mean, we only used just one type of pasta, and that was it. But it was mostly basic. There wasn't a lot put into it. Whereas today, we have all these cooking shows and all these other cultures that is showing us their wonderful dishes. And we want to experience that. So that's another reason why our traditional meals are starting to fade and very few people are actually cooking it, which is very sad. And I hope by me creating these videos that we can get people back into those old traditional meals, especially for this generation. I talk a lot about traditional foods and cooking those foods. But one thing I haven't talked a lot about is the memories behind those foods. And I think a lot of times it's us remembering my generation and the older generation of going to our grandparents and sitting down and having that Sunday dinner. Being able to drop by during the week and see them cook up some fish and potatoes and fry up some moose meat. All these old-fashioned meals that we don't see today. And I know back then, the grandmother was always in the kitchen, baking, cooking, making bread. But today, both parents are usually working, and it gets more difficult to be able to get into the kitchen, be able to have those sit-down meals without it being processed or frozen. And I think if we can drift back and try to change that, and I don't know if where the economy is the way it is today, if we'll see a shift where people will get back into the kitchen and have those sit-down meals, because that is one of the things that I think that we enjoy the most when we have those traditional meals, is remembering those memories, remembering those sit down with our grandparents and the entire family coming together on those special occasions and having that sit down meal. I think that's the biggest part and the most enjoyable part of us cooking and eating our traditional meals. And I know this generation never got to experience a lot of that. And I don't think it's the same as it was, and I could be wrong. But I know when our grandparents pass away, it definitely changes. People seem to be busier. They don't have time for family gatherings. And as people move away, it totally changes the way things were, the way we grew up. And those traditional meals kind of start to drift away. If we're able to go back in time and be able to bring this generation with us, I think there'll be a totally different outlook on the meals that we had back then to the meals we have today. They might not enjoy it the same because it's like required taste. I mean, a lot of meals that we had back then, a lot of the ingredients I wasn't too crazy about, but today I love it. So I know it's an acquired taste, a lot of our foods, especially our traditional foods. The salt fish, not everyone likes fish, but not everyone grew up to eating fish several times a week. Now it's not as accessible as it once was, and to buy it is very expensive. So I can understand where our generation has kind of drifted away from our traditional meals, our traditional way of life, our culture. But we need to do everything we can to preserve it. No matter where you live, we all have our own culture, and we have our own traditions, and I think it's so important that we preserve it as much as possible. So when it comes to cooking, do you prefer the simple way? Do you prefer out of a box, frozen? Or do you prefer creating your own creation? Now I know a lot of times we don't have time to go through all that work of cooking. That's why you see a lot of our meals, lots of food we share with family and friends, but we also got enough for the next day and sometimes even the third day. If we're going to spend a lot of time dirtying up dishes, as they say, we're going to make sure we got enough for a couple of days at least. That way we don't have to be in the kitchen again the next day. Look how delicious this stir fry is. I mean, you got all your egg noodles, lots of vegetables. Now there are lots of carbs and sugars in those sauces, but it is absolutely delicious. It's very hearty, a beautiful stir fry. Now when it comes to family, how often do you sit down as a family to enjoy a home cooked meal? Whether it be a traditional meal or a new style, or just something you threw together yourself. How often do you sit down with your family? And how often do you sit down with your parents or grandparents? And if you had the opportunity to do so, what would you change? What would you do different? What are some of the memories that you have with your family, with your grandparents? It'd be nice if we can all take a trip back and remember those incredible times that we spent together as a family enjoying our old traditional meals. We'll see you in our next video.